right, good afternoon, everyone. I have 4 o'clock, so we will begin. Welcome to the Planning Committee of Tuesday, May the 4th. The first item is the minutes of April the 21st are here for approval. Were there any errors or omissions? Moved by Councillor McNulty. Is there a seconder? Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Day. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Were there any additions to the agenda? All right, seeing none. The next committee meeting will be held May 19th at 4 p.m. in council chambers. And for committee's information, there are several pieces of on-table correspondence that you should have received. We have 2 pieces of correspondence from John Roston and the Richmond Rental Housing Advocacy Group, Landlord BC, Michelle Lee, Polygon, UDI, and Vanprop. Item number 1, options to secure market rental housing in new development and options to increase low-end market rental lemur contributions. Mr. Hopkins, and I know we're going to have a bit of a presentation, and is 1 and 2 going together?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Great, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, for the first 2 items on today's agenda, staff would like to provide a brief overview as these reports generally work hand in hand with each other. These reports in front of you today have been prioritized and brought forward to Planning Committee in a timely manner as a result of a council request in early February of this year. Specifically, council expressed an interest in the feasibility of a mandatory approach to securing market rental housing units, in addition to the feasibility of expanding the low-end market rental program and cash in lieu rates. With this urgent direction, staff conducted a municipal scan on similar market rental and affordable housing programs and initiatives. What we found is that Richmond has achieved significant success in securing new market rental housing units through an incentives-based program, and have been a leader in affordable housing program with a citywide policy approach that is fair and equitable. Staff also retained an economic consultant, GP Rollo and Associates, to assess the financial feasibility of various options to expand the city's rental housing approach. This work helped staff to provide a recommended option for council's consideration. The recommended approach minimizes significant financial risks for market developments while ensuring that the city remains a regional leader in securing rental housing units for Richmond residents. And I'll pass it over to Mr. Cody Spencer to summarize the recommendations.
Thanks, John. The recommendations proposed in items 1 and 2 on today's agenda would further enhance the city's rental housing policy. Specific citywide recommendations include introducing a new 10% market rental requirement for multifamily apartment developments with more than 60 units with an associated density bonus, and increasing the lemur requirement from 10 to 15% in the city center area plan. Additional recommendations relate to updating lemur program cash in lieu rates and a recommended community amenity contribution for projects with less than 60 units in lieu of
Cody, sorry to interrupt, but you're kind of fading in and out there. I don't know if you can speak maybe a bit closer to your microphone, but it was kind of dipping in and out. Thank you.
Sure. To ensure that updates to the market rental policy are having the intended outcomes, staff recommend reporting back to council after the program has been in place for 2 years. Similar to past practice when introducing policy amendments, 1-year grandfathering period is recommended for in-stream development applications. New applications will be subject to the updated requirements. Finally, staff recommend that public engagement regarding these policy changes occur as part of City Council's consideration of the proposed bylaw amendment. For example, stakeholders and members of the public would have the opportunity to provide input at the public hearing for the bylaw amendment. That concludes our remarks, and we are happy to answer questions. Terry Mulholland from Rollo & Associates is also with us this afternoon and is available to answer questions related to his analysis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And yes, item number 2 is low-end market rental contribution rate review. So I'll open it up to committee for questions. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I got a number of questions. First of all, staff, thank you for the copious amount of work that you've done on this particular report. I have a number of questions and some comments, if I may, on it, and see where we go from here. Number one is when we talk about a 0.01 floor ratio, et cetera, and for density bonusing, et cetera, do we have information on a gradual scale of 0.2 or 0.3? It was, because there's so much information in here, it's very difficult sometimes to understand what it really means. So I guess my question is, the floor ratio for density bonusing. Don't we give 0.1 for some things now? And then what does that mean in terms of the report that we have?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, I think to answer your question, the 0.1 FAR is currently part of an incentive-based density bonus in our market rental housing policy for mixed rental strata developments. So the idea was that if we were going to make this a mandatory market rental requirement, that we would continue with that 0.1 density bonus into this new program. So that's where the 0.1 FAR came from. It isn't meant to compensate for the market rental area that the developer is going to provide. In fact, in many cases, it might be less than the market rental area. So that's where the 0.1 FAR came from. And quite honestly, we don't actually have to include that 0.1 FAR. We could actually just acquire the market rental without the density bonus.
Well, I'm looking at this document. Thank you for that response. I'm looking at this document as a vehicle to reach our goals in the community and supporting low-income housing, rental housing, and to be quite frank with you, I'd like to have seen cooperative housing and raw housing in here as well. If I may, again, along a similar line, the 60 apartment units. Why was it 60? Why isn't it 50? Why isn't it 80? This goes back, reminds for those of us who were on council when we were talking about Hamilton. Remember, we had a break off of 84 units for X policy, and under 83 units would be Y policy. So I guess where did 60 come from?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, I'll begin answering that question, and there might be a few others who have been around longer than I have that could answer it. I know that the 60-unit threshold came from the Lemur contribution rate, and we basically have tried to mirror the market rental housing program to be similar to Lemur as far as administration is concerned. For projects that are less than 60 units, definitely there's more difficulty in providing for a handful of rental units. Is one of the reasons, but developers have a choice below 60 units to either provide for market rental and would get the 0.1 FAR density bonus, or to pay cash in lieu. But if they're paying cash in lieu, they would not get the density bonus. And it's, like I say, it's similar to the Lemur program.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I can add to that, when John said others that have been around longer, I guess that's me. Yeah, when you first introduced the Lima program, I think it was 80 units. And so that was the threshold. If you had a project with less than 80 units, you had to pay cash in lieu, but you didn't have to provide the bricks and mortar units. A few years ago now, you revised that to 60. And for the Lima program, we're not recommending a change to that, but we have adopted the same threshold for our recommendations on mandatory market rentals. So it seems like an appropriate number. And so for units below 60, but above 5 units, they would pay cash in lieu rather than bricks and mortar units.
I do remember that, and I remember initiating the 5%. The Rollo report, and I thank you for referring to that, except I couldn't read most of it because it's too small. But can we get a copy of the full report? I think we need the full report to understand it, integrate it into this project.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor McNulty, absolutely. We could forward the full report, absolutely.
I think we need to have it. It's a public document, obviously, and it needs to go on to it. I can ask the other, you know, it's a good base. I want to see a Made in Richmond solution to affordable housing and low-income housing, et cetera. And this is a good start. And I'd like to see charts. Like you said, well, we adopted point 1 because that's what's in. But I'd like to see what's point 2. I'd like to see what's point 3. In our second report, we've got increases and I don't want to, I guess we have to discuss them together. In that we've got almost 50% increase, in some cases 150% increase. And I kind of like to see where those stand. I know chances are Lemur is going to increase because in the city center we already, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 17.9% of what we ended up getting. And that sort of seems to be close to a standard that we're going to have to continue out through multifamily developments in the community. So 15% in a way isn't out of line. Have we had any input from, other than what we got on table today, from any of the development community, UDI, the small builders, whoever else we consult with to write this?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor McNulty, we did meet with UDI representatives a few weeks back as part of our regular meeting, and so we did give them an update on where we were at, and when the report was public, we made sure that the copies of the report were distributed to the UDI members.
Okay. I guess the other thing I'd like to have seen is the list of incentives like we have on page 19, but what the implications there are. You know, what is the implication of those incentives? You know, if we gave up parking reductions, et cetera, in the downtown core or wherever, to see where those are. The other question I had, which I had many questions, but I don't want to, there are other members that want to talk, but I'm going to make a comment or two, is in terms of dividing city center with the rest of the community. For example, we have had a development on railway. When I brought in the 5% and supported it and pushed it, a small builder had to give basically 3 townhouses out of 14 because of Lemur, which is actually higher than what we're giving in downtown because it was 14%. So my question here is, why aren't they the same? And you can say, well, it was the cost of land, et cetera, et cetera. That is not our concern. We're not developers. We're to look for affordable housing and things that we've got. If somebody wants to develop in Seafair by me or in downtown across from Lansdowne, that's their business. That's a business venture. The city doesn't have to compensate. So my question is, why wasn't it suggested 15% across the base?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, I'll begin with that one. It was simply economics. Smaller sites, obviously outside the city center, can only absorb so much, I guess, additional low-end market rental and market rental. We could look at different combinations of Lemur and take out the market rental component, but at the end of the day, it was felt that we could have a program that would have market rental across the city, but the Lemur contribution would have to vary between city center and within and without of the city center. I could also defer this to Mr. Mulholland if he'd like to respond to that question.
Okay, I'd like to know why.
Right, Mr. Mulholland?
Hi, thank you for having me here today. And through the chair, the answer to that question, as Mr. Hopkins pointed out, is a function of the economic analysis that we did, and also largely the built form and building materials involved. So our analysis wasn't necessarily formulated on city center versus non-city center. It's the fact that city center, most of the new development is going to be in concrete and steel and high-rise. whereas most of the development outside city center is going to be wood frame, whether that's apartments or townhouses. So when we were looking at the economics of how is this going to affect, land of being able to be developed as proposed in the analysis, it had a bigger effect outside city center if you start trying to carve out large portions for market rental and low end of market rental. So we ended up coming up with a bunch of different recommendations for different areas. And so the city is then able to select from that what they want to put forward.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
We weren't entitled to obviously to have the full report, so we wouldn't have had that in here. So I thank you for that. Go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Jurassic?
I would point out, because it's been mentioned a couple of times, that Council was provided with the full Rollo report late last week, so we can certainly circulate it again. But it has been circulated already. Councillor McNulty mentioned a project on Railway Avenue, and I am familiar with that, and it was a bit of a pilot project, and the effective LEMA contribution rate was 15% of the units. I think the difference here, though, is that the recommendation from staff on that site under the reports that you have before you today would be 10% LEMA. So yes, it's lower than that pilot project, but you also have a requirement for 10% market rental, and that didn't exist with the pilot. So, and this is a more general policy that's intended to be viable for multiple developments. So even though the LEMA is lower, there is, under the recommendations, a market rental requirement which did not exist with that project.
If I may, I'm sorry, if I got the report in my box, I either misplaced it or haven't seen it, so that's my fault, and I'll check and get a copy of it. On our page 53, we look at housing demand estimates. And we talk about moderate income of 40 to 70,000 in terms of rental. What about those 20,000 or less to 40,000? Do we take any of those folks into consideration?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, households who earn less than $40,000 a year are targeted through standalone affordable housing developments. So an example is the Pathways Affordable Housing, Stories, and other similar developments. Those projects are really the primary method the city uses to target low-income folks.
No, I know they're low income, but I was hoping that we might have included them in there, because there are many people in Richmond in that category that don't make $40,000 a year and are still looking for rental in somewhere along the lines. I guess my concern, and the motion is on the floor, that I would like to see some more comparative charts. I'd like to see us consult with groups before we go forward on this, chairperson. I believe we're going to move ahead with the report. I don't see any problem with the report. It's a great basis, et cetera, but I think there needs to be a bit more fleshing out and a bit more comparison from my perspective to see where we're at. And I have a suggestion for that later on how to do that, because I see, everybody else will want to have a say to it and get their questions answered. But I want to really see us have a Made in Richmond report, because this is the basis of our whole future right now in terms of rental housing, and I think we've got to encourage more and more. I do, if I may, just in finishing up before I pass the chair, I forgot what page it's on, but I do like your suggestions for speeding up things and fast tracking on Appendix 1 on PLN 27. I think some of those things could, I think we need to be a little bit more generous, but really encourage people, I think, to do rental housing, and we push it. But I like the idea of fast tracking out if you're going to do 100%. And I don't like the review of just market. If you're going to do 100% rental, market and low income and whatever, and moving those along, because I think they're needed every day that goes by. Somebody is trying to find our rental vacancy rate is 0.7 in Richmond, and in the Lower Mainland, I think it's might even be 1. So we're all facing the same. So I have a suggestion later.
Okay, we'll
You
come back to you.
on that. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Steves.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions. I'm going to start with a couple of questions. One I don't understand. It talks about 10% of the residential floor area. What does that turn out to be? What percentage in units?
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, so there's obviously a choice of using floor area or units. Using floor area is definitely easier to administer, but it also provides some flexibility in the type of units that would take up that floor area. So if we're looking at more family-friendly units, and we do have a 40% minimum requirement, we would make sure that that area would be utilized for the appropriate type of units.
So what range of units would we be getting in terms of numbers?
Through the chair to Councillor, through the chair to Councillor Steves, right now we do have a 40% minimum requirement for 2-bedroom units or above. So that threshold would still apply to the lemur contribution and to the market rental contribution and to the remaining strata as well. So you would have that 40% minimum threshold to begin with.
Madam Chair, if I may, one of the reasons that we base it on the floor area, a percentage of floor area rather than percentage of units, is to avoid people, developers, potentially reducing the size of the units, so that the total floor area so that although you have 10% of units, total units, you have something less than 10% of floor area. And so in a way it's a safety mechanism so that you can't sort of reduce the size of the units to provide less affordable housing. Now, I think what John's alluding to is that if in a particular development we negotiated a lot of large units, 3-bedroom units, then that might, if the rest of the market condos were not 3-bedroom units, they were smaller, then that might calculate out at less than 10% of total unit count, but that's because you're getting a bigger unit. And that would be something that council could look at specifically when that development came forward. So really the 10% of floor space is a safety mechanism to make sure that people don't try to kind of minimize the contribution to the LEMA housing.
Okay, thanks. Next question, in terms of the of adoption of this plan, I read in there somewhere that the staff doesn't want to apply it to existing projects that are in the bin. And I made a comment, in fact I voted that way a month ago, that I will not support either Talisman or Lansdowne if it doesn't include a maximum of affordable housing and market rentals. So what is that all about? Is that to exclude Talisman and Lansdowne?
Just to be clear, I don't think Lansdowne has made any applications yet. We just did the official community plan amendments. Is that correct?
Perhaps I can deal with that. That is correct, Madam Chair. So the referrals that we received did not say that grandfathering could not be proposed. I would point out that when the city has changed requirements in the past, we have always provided some notice and some grandfathering of existing applications only. So on the Lansdowne site, they do not have rezoning applications in, as far as I'm aware, and I'm looking to Wayne. Wayne's nodding. So if you were to move ahead with what's recommended, they would not be grandfathered. They would need to comply as new applications with the new standards. A delay in adopting the standards, though, could allow people to accelerate their applications. Regarding the polygon development, we are working with them on, that was referred back to staff, and we are working with them specifically on that file to investigate ways to increase the amount of rental housing on that site. And so to date, Polygon has been cooperative and is working in good faith. And we hope that when we eventually are ready to bring that back to council, there will be an increase. So, but the grandfathering that is recommended is the same grandfathering arrangement that we have used for, certainly in all of my time with Richmond, when we have adopted a new, more onerous standard. And I think that it is an important thing to do so that people who have made investment decisions and are partway through projects don't have the rug pulled out from under them with dramatically different terms and rules to what they assumed when they started.
Okay, I've got a difference of opinion on that. We'll deal with that later. My concern, other concern as well, is I read in here somewhere that we would not negotiate additional rental units and additional low-cost housing units after we adopted this policy. Is that correct? Because we've always simply, when a development comes forward, we've negotiated whatever we can get. And it seems to me that we should set this as a basic standard and still negotiate whatever we can get. A piece of commercial property that's rezoned for residential, the airspace above that property and the increased value, it's zero cost to the developer. And so therefore, why should we take 100% of it? So I'm just wondering why, if that's correct, that we're not going to add further negotiations depending on the development that comes forward.
Madam Chair, maybe I can tackle that one too. I'm not quite sure, Councillor Steves, what you're referring to in the report, but absolutely, if you were to adopt these standards, they would form the baseline. And we have had projects in the past that have been willing to negotiate and provide more, and we would continue to do that. So this is the floor, not the ceiling, the 15% of the 10%. Regarding commercial or industrial property, all of the affordable housing projects and units that have been delivered to date have been delivered without deviating from the community plans and area plans. So we have not been, for instance, converting industrial lands to residential or for residential use or rental residential use. Some communities have been doing that, but we have not, because as you're well aware, industrial land is a scarce commodity and it needs to be protected as well. So as a general rule, we would not encourage people to, say, propose the conversion of an industrial parcel within an industrial precinct to residential.
I was more referring to commercial, because Lansdowne is commercial.
Yeah, and I think that with, perhaps I can refer or refresh your memory on a site other than Lansdowne. I think if you look at the Broadmoor Shopping Centre, that's a good example where some of the building stock, the stores, it was an older building. We looked at it site specifically. We negotiated for the redevelopment of a part of that site, and it included I forget the number exactly, but I think it was close to 100 rental units that went in above the stores. So that's a good example of what we would be willing to continue to do down the road. And there's nothing in this in these recommendations that would preclude continuing to do that.
Okay, that's what I was worried about.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone here that maybe Wayne would remember how many rental units were in there, but I think there's a full 4 floors of units above the commercial. Yeah.
Is that it for you, Councillor Steve?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, thank you. Councillor Day?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is a lot of information to absorb, and today John Hopkins gave us these drafts, which I really think should be included in the minutes and be included in the report as we go forward, because it helps to put it in perspective. You know, like you're reading number after number after number, sometimes you can get a little.
You're breaking up, Councillor Day. Can you?
They're all
Here, I'll hold it really, really close.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the graphs that John sent, these ones here, I think they should be included in the report because they help to make it easier to understand, and they put things in perspective. So if I could request that for council meeting next week. And then I wanted to talk about the grandfathering. This is the one that I'm kind of concerned about. I do feel that if like in the case of Talisman, I mean, they purchased the property, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and have already come to council and, you know, been approved for certain levels. I don't know that we can, you know, as Mr. Ursig said, pull the rug out from under them. I think fair is fair. If they came in under a particular guideline, yeah, let's continue to work with them and see if we can tweak it, and good on staff for doing that. But I think it is important to, you know, be, you know, open and honest with everyone, and I don't see it being a benefit to our reputation to suddenly change the rules halfway through the game. So with regards to grandfathering, you mentioned earlier that it's a 1-year grandfather, right? Is that correct? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, through the chair to council today, the grandfathering provisions that are being recommended is a 1-year grandfathering period. So if these bylaws that are in front of you today are adopted, and the earliest for adoption would be the June public hearing, that any application that came in after that date would have to abide by the new rules. The only way you could be grandfathered is if you applied before that mid-June date and you get your application to council within 1 year for first reading. If you're not able to do that and you've applied after the mid-June public hearing, you would be having to apply under the proposed rules.
Okay, thank you. So under normal circumstances, that would be enough time, would you say?
Yeah, through the Chair to Councillor Day, yes, it would be, and it is consistent, as Mr. Ursig said, with other policies that Council considered, introducing step code and other provisions that would have an impact to the development community. The 1-year provision is typical.
Okay, thank you. Also, earlier today, yesterday, we received emails from the Landlords BC group and from UDI, and they suggested a 3-year phase-in. What are your comments about that?
Through the Chair to Councillor Day, we have reviewed that and considered it. I think at the end of the day, we'd like to keep this sort of consistent with the way we've approached other policies that have impacted the development community. We feel the 1-year time frame is sufficient for the development community to adjust to the new provisions.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that, prices are going up, and many of these developers bought these properties at this point on sale, years ago. And so if they do come in after the 1 year, then, fair is fair. They have to come in under the new rules. So I just want to compliment staff on a really thorough report. And my only question was, Councillor McNulty mentioned the Rollo report. I've got 2 pages here. Was there a lot more? Did we get that?
Yeah. Through the Chair to Councillor Day, my apologies if some of you did not receive it. We did send out a memo, I believe it was on late Friday, to all of Council with a copy of the Rollo report, or the full page report, which is about 10, 11 pages. And this was based on requests that we were receiving from the public to receive copies of the report, that we wanted Council to have a copy first before we addressed those requests.
So just to put it in perspective, I think I got 47 emails on Friday. So really, it's better if it's mailed out in its entirety or in the binder, either one way or the other. So we're supposed to be getting this information 5 business days before we have to vote on it. So there should be plenty of time to get those together. So I just ask that when we get our package, we have the entire package. So thank you very much. Great job.
Councillor Liu?
Thank you, through the chair. I was interested when I saw all this, and especially when I start comparing it against places like, say, Coquitlam. They've got an additional 1.0 FAR with 20% of the units and priority type units and things like that. Like they're giving a lot more density, right? And then, so I asked John Hopkins to produce this graph for us to better understand what's going on. And so, if you look at this one here, you can see that the blue is how many units would be saleable in an existing situation now. And so those are the units that are now paying for your affordable housing units, essentially. So those are the ones paying for it. So if you, say, assume that each unit's worth $100,000, those 90 units are now paying $111,000 to pay for those units there. If you look at this other situation, you've now increased that per unit cost to those guys to $120,000 a unit. So when we think about the affordability of the people that are trying to buy the homes in this area, it's gone up considerably. Like you're adding another at least 8% to theirs in order to produce this huge amount, assuming like that the market rental itself pays for itself, assuming there's no subsidy involved, because the subsidy is solely with the low income or the affordable housing. So I'm wondering if it makes more sense to put in 10% market rental and 10% lemur, and then start growing the lemur over time. I think that makes more sense, because right now I know the development community is looking at it and saying we're being hit with 25%. There's basically, see how the line goes up just a tiny bit. That's your bonus density that you're getting above what you originally had. That bonus density it's wafer thin, as you can see off the graph. So, and then you compare it to places like Coquitlam and other places, and they're giving a lot more density. So you can see, I think we're going to see a lot of development move to places like Coquitlam. I did talk to a realtor on the weekend, and he said the units he's being asked to show and the land assemblies he's being asked to show, is people don't want to build anything bigger than 30 units. They want to look at the kind of 30 unit range because they just don't want to be involved in this number anymore. So I'm wondering if we're biting off a bit too much at the outset versus, starting it incrementally and building up. We started some years ago, we added that whole affordable housing component. We doubled the numbers, and now we're looking to increase the numbers yet again by a huge amount, and adding on the market rental portion. So, I think we're adding a ton. We haven't reduced the parking restrictions, and we aren't really giving a true incentive to do this. And I realize that, we're constrained by our OCP, but are we actually, we are going to look at our OCP again in a couple of years and relook at that and look at, adding some real density to some of these areas to create homes for people. And I think we might be biting off more than we're going to end up getting because we're overreaching here. We're not seeing this kind of request from anyone else in the region. Is like, how is this defensible then for this 15% versus staying at 10% and adding incrementally?
Madam Chair, perhaps I can respond to that. I'm pretty confident, and the staff team are pretty confident that what we've recommended is viable. We went to outside expertise, and the methodology that we've used to assess this is the same methodology that we've used when we introduced the LEMA program, when we increased the requirements of the LEMA program. So, of course, on this issue, there's a range of opinion, and I think what we've tried to do is find a balance that continues to be economically viable for the development community, but also that responds to what we're hearing from the community about needing more affordable housing. So we're pretty confident that what we're recommending is not going to drive development elsewhere. But, it isn't that our OCP is constraining development, it's that Richmond constraints are limiting what can be done within the OCP. So to put it quite bluntly and plainly, you're stuck between a water table and an airport height. And so you do not have, in the areas of city centre where you have the most development, you do not have carte blanche to crank up densities the way that some communities do. You have some real constraints. And the building can only, the floor plate of the building can only be increased so far before there's no site left. And frankly, they look pretty hideous. So, you know, we are working within the realities of the constraints that exist in this community. And you have something that's very much tailor-made for Richmond. And it's worked before. I don't believe that it's going to drive development away. I think that the support, or what we've heard from the development community, has been fairly measured. And although it's unrealistic to expect them to embrace more onerous requirements, frankly, I've seen, you know, much stronger opposition in the past on other issues. So, you know, I think what you have in front of you is workable in the Richmond context. And Coquitlam, well, frankly, they do things differently, and they don't have a height constraint, so they are able to have a different package.
All right, thank you. Now, I did have a couple of questions, and let me just see. So I haven't had the opportunity to look at the graphs as they just came into my email at 4:45 this afternoon. So yeah, I had a question of grandfathering, that's been done, the gradual rollout, some of the suggestions about more density bonus and other incentives we've talked about. Yeah, the cash in lieu, I made myself my own little chart because I kind of like looking at that information. And so I think we did talk about it, but and in a way it does make sense to have the city center area as a separate entity because it is so much denser. But you know, we're going up 100%, 111%, 150% on some, and so it is a lot. So I think I'll stop on my questions right now, and we do have 3 delegations, and we have, are there any other questions from committee before we go to the delegations? We can always come back to. All right, we have Mr. Roston, Ms. Lee, and Mr. Glover in that order. So Mr. Roston, hello, good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and you have 5 minutes if you want to introduce yourself and get started. Thank you.
John Roston, representing the Richmond Rental Housing Advocacy Group. Thank you very much for the opportunity. As you know from our written submission, we really had 5 reasons for referring the market rental housing policy back to staff, which is what we'd like you to do today. The first had to do with what you've mentioned, the fact that we only had the executive summary. We did receive from John Hopkins yesterday the full report, so many thanks for that. But as you'll see when you look at it, it's very dense, and we really think everybody needs more time to go through and really examine the figures and see what the basis is for the recommendations that are made in the report. There is sort of an overarching principle, quite aside from the Rollo report, and that is we do not expect that developers are going to make as much profit out of rental housing as they do out of condos for sale to investors. That is not our objective, and we don't think that should be the city's objective. And we don't think that if you provide more rental, you have to somehow jack up the price of a limited number of strata condos for sale in order to make the profit you were making before. That isn't the objective. The question is, would a developer make a reasonable profit out of building rental housing? That is the question. And if you read the Rollo report, that is really their basis. They say, given the cost of land, would this project be financially viable? And if a project is financially viable, you're going to find developers who will come in and build them, particularly builders who specialize in purpose-built rental housing. They are maybe some of the developers now who are used to these sky-high profits on building condos will bow out. Fine, we don't need them. So that is our point of view in terms of the overall objective. In terms of the report itself, one of the things we would like to know more about is the thing that's already been mentioned by several councillors, which is that you have an existing commercial development, not an industrial development, but a commercial development, and you're adding housing on top of it or beside it on the existing land. So as Councillor Steve said, the land cost for the additional housing that you're adding is zero, and that is not covered in the report. So we would like to see that covered, and in some cases it may not be commercial, it may be an existing housing development where you're increasing the density by adding housing above or beside on the same plot of land. So that is one thing we would like to know more about. The second thing has to do with the actual size of the development. So here we're talking economies of scale. Two types of economies of scale. The economies of scale that just come from on construction costs. So the larger the project, the more the economies of scale on construction costs. And then once it's built, the economies of scale on managing the rental. So the more units you have being managed by the same crew of people, the lower your rents can be and still make a decent profit on rental. The other thing that we would like to talk about are municipal tax incentives. You'll notice in the executive summary, they talk about most of these incentives as not being worthwhile. However, if you read the full report, suddenly up pops the statement, and I quote, "There is a material benefit from tax abatement to the party that owns and operates these rental units after project completion." So in other words, the property tax incentive that you're trying to give to the project to make it more financially viable and enable lower rents is not to the developer who's building it. It's to the person who is managing it once it's built. In many cases, given the proposals you're receiving, it's actually the same company that's doing both. But the fact is, if you make it cheaper to manage after it's built, then that makes it more attractive in terms of actually building it. So in other words, your profit.
Your time is up. Can you wrap it up, please? Thank you.
Yes, and just one last sentence, and that is agree with what the councillors have said about grandfathering. We went through grandfathering on mega mansions, and a year's delay for implementation, we wound up with 60 mega mansions we would not otherwise have. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Roston. Next, we have Ms. Lee. Are you here with us?
Hello.
Hello. Please introduce yourself, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for allowing me to delegate on this item. My name's Michelle Lee, and I'm a resident in Richmond. And I just wanted to speak about a few things, but I wanted to introduce the fact that Canada recognizes that adequate housing is a fundamental human right, and it will require all levels of government, and particularly the City Council, to ensure that this is realized in our community. Unfortunately, it's the most vulnerable in our society who often suffer from the lack of safe, affordable housing. What has been presented so far does not go far enough to ensure that as a city we are doing all we can to reduce the inequality that results from inadequate housing. Council has the opportunity to have a lasting impact on our community by ensuring that you advocate for the highest possible number of market rentals and low-end market rentals, while still ensuring that developers are profitable. The scenarios presented in the staff report fail to discuss when land is developed at little or low or no cost, as in the Lansdowne situation, just as John mentioned. I would ask that you refer it back to staff so that we can get these numbers right. I have often shared stories in the past of people I know who have struggled to find housing in Richmond, and one that was really heartbreaking to me in the last month, I heard the story of a family that the father lost his job during the pandemic, and now there is a family of 4 with 2 teenagers living in a one-bedroom. When I asked if it was a one-bedroom unit, the response I got was it was a one-bedroom in another house. So this is impacting people in a big way, and it seems crazy, but I'm actually getting texts as I'm in this meeting asking about how to find housing for a senior right now who can't seem to find any affordable housing in Richmond. Our family has struggled with this, not mine personally, but my extended family. I've shared in the past that my brother-in-law with developmental disability had to move outside of Richmond, outside of our community where he was supported, to New Westminster because there were no adequate housing in Richmond, because often home share providers are renters and they can no longer afford to rent in Richmond. And a lot of the nonprofits that provide housing now can't afford to be here either. So I just ask that, I know that we're talking about numbers and we can get caught up in those numbers of 10%, 15%, whatever it is, but just know that even by pushing for a little bit more, you're affecting our community in a big way. And I would just ask that you do refer this back and then consider how much further can we push it while still ensuring that developers will make a profit, and making sure that we're looking at the right numbers when there is no cost or low cost to the land, as Harold has mentioned and John has mentioned, and many of you, the other councillors, have also mentioned. So that's all I want to say, and I just hope that you will refer it back and look at the numbers again. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Glover. Mr. Glover, are you here? Oh, there you are. Good afternoon. Please identify yourself, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Fail. My name is Robin Glover with Polygon Homes. Thank you for having me here today as a delegate. First, I just want to begin by saying that I commend Council for their efforts in the rental policy in the Lower Mainland, and especially to staff too for turning around such a thorough policy report in obviously such a quick amount of time. There's really 3 points that I wanted to touch on today. They've been discussed a little bit already, but perhaps I can talk about them with respect to our Talisman project.
You're breaking up a little bit. Can you kind of move in a little bit more? Thanks.
Of course. My apologies. Is that any better?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Just want to speak to three points. In essence, the policies contained within the reports are achievable, given kind of 3 key mechanisms that we've already discussed here today. The first piece is gradual phase-in of these policies to give the development industry and landowners an opportunity to absorb and adjust some of those costs. The second thing, incentives. Appreciate the 0.1 SAR has been considered. However, it's insufficient to offset or even come close to offsetting any of the additional rental costs that we're talking about here. So I certainly recognize that we have groundwater issues and height issues in Richmond, but I think there are other opportunities such as growing the floor plate, orientation. We can look at setbacks. There are other mechanisms that we can look at other than just height. to address the density issue. I know in the Robo report they talk about parking reductions as being really not significant, but the truth is that in Richmond, because of the water table, parking reductions are very significant. At our project, as an example, we have a single level of parking below all the rental components. If we add more density to that rental component, we actually have to start tanking arcade to address the water table issue. So it adds significant cost purely on the rental side. But a number of these incentives, when combined, can have a real impact on the viability of the project. Third, grandfathering. Specific example at Talisman, we purchased the land in early 2018. At the time of land purchase, there was a lemur policy in place at 10%. There was no market rental policy at all. Very soon after we purchased the land, the voluntary rental policy came into effect, which we complied with and have exceeded. But it's an example of one piece of policy that was introduced during that 3-year period. In addition to that, some of the other unknown factors that we've been impacted by over the last 3 years, TransLink fee was added. That's in the tune of about $2 million. TCC increases, which have added about $50 million to the cost. Construction costs for concrete have gone up about $30 a square foot.
You're fading off again, sorry.
What I'm trying to get at is there are many unknown costs that have been added to the project viability, whether they're DCC increases, construction cost increases, or new policies like TransLink fees. Those are all coming off that initial land cost purchase price. We can't renegotiate land price 3 years in the past in our time machine. Land costs are fixed. So what we're hoping is that grandfathering moving forward will allow the clear policy framework to be in place so that we can have confidence that investing in Richmond invests in those clear policies with certainty. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. All right, back to committee. Are there, Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Appreciate everything that's been said and all the input. Just to, maybe I'll give my point of view on it, and then we'll see where we're going. Given that staff have prepared an outstanding document for us to start with, I'm just wondering whether it's worth our while to think about deciding to table this for a couple of weeks to get some questions answered. We've got some issues. We got information came in at 3:45, etc. I am pro-development. The report is a good report for the base. I don't agree with some of the incentives personally that are there. I'd like to know a number of things. And I think if we want to reach our goals, we need to slow down and make sure we've got it right, because this is going to go with the future. I'm interested in units, the number of units that we can get for people and people to live. I don't feel that the incentives are enough. That's a personal opinion. Where we can give more incentives to people to do with and build rental, it's important that we give those incentives. The one thing we can negotiate, and that's density. That's the only thing council has, and any council has. And I think it's up to council to make those kinds of decisions. I'd like to look at the page 27. I'd like to not refer this back, but to table it.
And to table to another meeting? What
Another meeting.
Yeah, what meeting are you
2 weeks
considering?
down the road, but maybe staff can tell me when I finish.
Okay.
Whether they can do what I'm requesting. I believe right now we have the longer we wait, we have missed opportunities, but I think we've got to look at our own record of where we are. The incentive for any developer, as far as I'm concerned, is density, and it's important. And I'm not going to be emotional about whether a developer makes a few bucks or not. I'm more wanting to put that person that we heard from in the delegation into a unit where they can have some rental and stay in our community. And I think that's important. I'd like to know the number of applications that are in the hopper right now. They're there that might be applicable to this policy. I'd like to look at a scale in terms of density where we're given 0.1. I asked the question earlier, what about 0.2? For example, in townhouses, we go 0.2 on the floor area of bonus density. Concrete buildings in city center, we give 0.25. But on this one, we're only given 0.1 for rental. My question is, what does that look like? I don't know. I'm not a planner. I'm not a developer. But I can read a chart. And I'd like to have that information if it could come. And I would hope that staff wouldn't have to take a lot of time to do that kind of thing. I'd like to see where we can build up and go above. And also the number of units. I'm still not convinced the number of units. We went through this before. I appreciate what the Referral report is, but maybe we have a sliding scale. I don't know. Again, let's get a professional point of view. In terms of increasing LMR, we have to go up. We've charged other people 17.5%. So we've got to go up from 10. What that is, I don't know. How we imply that, I don't know. But we need to, because we've already made others examples. You can't go back on and say give to one and not be fair to all. I think that's one thing we need to be, and that is consistent as a council. So and the other thing I'd like is staff to take and consult with our partners, if you wish, our small builders, our whoever we normally consult with in the building community, whether it be UDI, whomever, the rental groups, etc., and get their feedback so we can better hone in and make our own decision on it. I'm not going by emotion. I'm going to try to go by rationality and common sense and what's best for the community. So I don't know how long that would take. Could it be done in a couple of weeks and we table this to the next planning committee meeting? If not, to the one after that, but no later, which would be 3.5 weeks from now.
So I have...
But I'd like staff to respond before I move a motion to table.
So I'm just going to go over some of the things you've said so that I can confirm with staff that they have this. So look at the number of applications in stream, scale in terms of density, where can we build up, the number of units on a sliding scale, and consult with partners whom we normally do and get feedback.
And the review of the incentives on page 27, even where we don't support them.
Review of incentives.
I'm not saying they're wrong. I thank you for your professional opinion. But if we're going to build a building right beside the SkyTrain, then I don't think we need parking. Okay, we can reduce parking. But if we're going to build something in Seafair, maybe we have to have a few more parking spots. So I'm not saying you're wrong or right. I just like to look at it. What are those kinds of implications? Maybe we have enough parking in Seafair. Maybe you have enough parking by the SkyTrain. I don't know. Okay, and some of the other issues. And
so you're speaking about items number 1 and 2.
Yes,
yes,
and on attachment 1, page 27.
And so staff, you've heard the list of things that we're asking, well, right now it's Councillor McNulty asking you to look at. Can that be done by May 19th?
Madam Chair, no, it cannot. The scope of the work that is being requested and the consultation, and also the requirement for us to provide it to committee well ahead of the meeting, it cannot be done for May 19th. You would be looking at a June meeting.
So it's a month.
So do you think it would be the first meeting? Because we do have 2 meetings planned in June. So the first meeting or the second meeting?
Madam Chair, I'm confident. I'm reasonably confident that we could have it back for the second, but we would try for the first. But you know, it really depends on how detailed an analysis and how detailed a consultation you are looking for staff to do. You know, something superficial, it can be turned around fairly quickly, but if you want something reliable, that takes more time. And we're not talking about small stuff here. When we're talking about fitting in more density and having to work within the, you know, various constraints that we have, that is not something you do on a Thursday afternoon.
Well, from my point of view, I think it should be, you know, more complete than a quick thing. So, I mean, that's, you know, I think we take pride in the work we do, and so I would think this is, you know, would be something that would be thorough.
So, Madam Chair, I don't have the date. Perhaps the clerk can, but you know, I'm confident that we could meet the second meeting of June. We would do our very best to come to the first, but it's not something I can guarantee at this point.
In terms of consultation, I'm looking for input. I'm not the detailed input for information, because we've already started to get input from a number of these groups.
Now,
but some groups we haven't talked to at all.
The first meeting is in June is June the 8th, and I believe the second meeting will be Wednesday, June the 23rd, because of the schedule. We're adding that one in. All right, so we will need a seconder for that. Is there a seconder for that referral? It has been seconded.
Second.
Thank you. And now we have Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You mentioned a date earlier, and I didn't write it down quick enough. If we went ahead with this and we let all of council look this over, we took it to, you know, a council meeting and then to public hearing and then back to a council meeting for final adoption, what dates will we be looking at in that case?
The public hearing in June is June 21st.
Okay. So no matter what, by the time we adopted it, we'd be looking the third week of June. Given that Councillor McNulty is not looking for a detailed report, he's just looking for more information as to what, more depth into what we already have. I'm concerned that if we don't get going on this, we're going to end up with all these applications that are going to come in ahead of the deadline, and then we're not going to be able to control the amount of, we're not going to be able to get the extra density. So I'm concerned about delaying this. I think that given that June 21st is the public hearing, that's a long ways away. I mean, that's like 6 weeks from now. I mean, why couldn't we work on this in the meantime, get the memos that we need, let council have a look at it, have the public hearing, and then if at that point we're still not satisfied that there's enough information, then table it. That would be my suggestion, is that we continue rolling the ball forward and continue consulting, but stick with the timeline.
All right, Councillor Steves.
Madam,
So you'd have to vote against the tabling motion on the floor. Councillor Steves?
I support the tabling motion. In particular, I do not support the grandfathering period, and if it comes back with grandfathering still in it, I will not even vote for it. We should have actually frozen all applications when we discussed this a year or two ago, when we were discussing, say, Richmond Center, when we asked them to increase the density. Things like this is so important that you don't get people coming in the back door and trying to get in ahead of the crowd. And basically, we should not be allowing any grandfathering whatsoever. We've been discussing this now for 3 or 4 years, and anybody who's bought property in Richmond over that time, or even those before, they've made millions of dollars waiting for it. The Talisman's had the property for years, and the land zone for years. Just this past year, we've seen the values of property in Richmond escalate phenomenally, even in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. So I have absolutely no sympathy for those that say that that we can't simply freeze the development and start from scratch. So I do not support grandfathering. But I think more important, I don't think we're getting enough residential low rental and certainly the numbers of units that we need, and I'd certainly like to see us explore ways of doing that. The UDI did send us a letter, and they said reducing parking would be a good idea, and I agree with that. I think as a principle, with environmental concerns, that the more parking we get rid of, and the more we force people to take transit, the better from a climate change perspective. So I can see that as a bargaining chip. So I'd like to see more discussion on this before we make the final decision. Otherwise, I'll simply be voting against it.
I will be supporting tabling. I think we've had a lot of information come in just in the last couple of days, and there was some ideas that, I think merit further investigation, especially along the incentives. I do support grandfathering, and so I don't see any other hands up. I will call the question on tabling. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Item number 3, referral on rental and age restrictions in future development. Mr. Craig?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Josh Ruiz here, and through you to the committee. We have nothing further to add to the staff report, but would just like to highlight a couple of items. As directed by Council, we have created an OCP policy for committee and Council's consideration today that would prohibit a future strata's ability from imposing a bylaw that would restrict an owner's ability to rent their unit or impose or pass any strata bylaw that would set an age restriction on the owners and the tenants in the building in perpetuity. The agreement would be secured on all future rezoning applications for townhouse and multifamily developments in all areas of the city. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, any questions from committee? Councillor McNulty?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I think it's a good thing. Have we talked to any current strata people that feel that their hands were tied to find out with some things? I'm more concerned if we do this, does this apply to current strata people as well?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, if this policy is adopted, it would only apply to rezonings that come forward to Council's consideration after the adoption of this policy. In terms of the second question related to consultation with existing strata corporations, no. The referral from Council was quite clear and directive in nature, create a policy, and that's what we have done.
Okay. If I may, and I just throw this out, if indeed we have a strata just being built, et cetera, and they go in, how, and the owners, or people that buy it, rent them out right away. How does this affect our B&Bs and our under 30-day rentals and stuff like that? Would it be, because if we allow, you can put your apartment or your suite up for rent. So I'm just wondering what that does to what we've tried to curtail within the community and stabilize within our community.
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, this policy would not impact the city's regulations around short-term rentals. That is done through separate bylaws. Those requirements would remain as is.
Okay. All right. I have no problem with it. I'm just worried, thinking about the quality of life of people who buy and want to live there, and then those who buy for investment and rent out. And I have no problem with it. Does this include pets as well? I didn't.
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, no. This policy simply deals with age of occupant and rental.
Okay. I just wondered whether anybody had the appetite for that. Just how much regulation do we want to put into it? That's all. So anyhow, I'll be supporting what you've got on the floor.
Councillor Day?
Yeah, I will be absolutely supporting this. That's why I brought it forward in the first place. I really, really feel that we need to make sure we make the best use of all of our new condos, and this is the only way to do it. I've heard of so many people. I must have gotten about a dozen emails this week from people saying that they were forced to move out because they had a child or they had a teenager or whatever. And so you get people that are being displaced because of the restrictions put on by, a uptight strata council. And let's face it, if people aren't paying attention, the rules can change in a heartbeat. So, and I've heard, again, of other stratas that are dealing with a difficult situation, and it becomes almost a turf war in the strata complex. So I think this should have been happening decades ago, and I wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Councillor Liu? Councillor Liu?
Sorry, I can't hear you guys, so if you can hear me, give me a nod. Okay, thanks, because I can't hear a thing from you right now. Thank you for this. Thank you to staff for this. Certainly the age thing was something that I brought forward. Certainly Councillor Day was interested in the rental portion, but the age restriction was something that's quite near and dear to my heart. I know that there's townhouses that do have rent age restrictions in them, and we're not affecting those, and they can continue to operate how they're operating. However, I think it's important when we're having new developments come in, we're giving them extra FAR, we're giving them extra bonus densities, we're doing all kinds of different things with them, and we're trying to get them to create a neighborhood and a community, and we don't want more.
Do you have a couple, Mr. Craig?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a bit of an update for committee. You may recall that Council approved or forwarded a non-farm use application for Choice School to the Agricultural Land Commission earlier this year in January. We have received notification from the Land Commission that that non-farm use application has been approved. The next step in the process will be the applicant submitting a rezoning application to bring the site into conformance with the current uses. That application will come forward to Council at a future date for your consideration. An application has not yet been submitted.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Hopkins, I believe you have an update?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to provide the committee just an update on addressing referral on potential restrictions to office stratification and just provide some upcoming consultation dates for you. So since the original referral on office stratification, staff have been conducting some initial research and interviews with industry experts and conducted preliminary analysis and development of potential alternatives. So the next step involves consultation with industry stakeholders, property owners, and the general public. And some of the specific dates and events include an interactive online workshop on Wednesday, May 12th with various stakeholders, then meeting with the Economic Advisory Committee at their May 13th online meeting, and public consultation through an online survey on Let's Talk Richmond, available from May 12th to May 25th. We intend to bring a report back to committee in July with the consultation results, recommendations, and options for committee and council to consider. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, and I believe that's it. All right, I don't believe there's any other updates. All right, looking for adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.